Hello, everybody. This is Fernando for the latest aliens and UFOs video. All right, let's go ahead and let's continue with part 2 of chapter 4 of the book UFO Sightings by Alan Baker. This one, yet again, continuing the theme associated with close encounters of the fourth kind. This is again having to do with actual alien abductions, the creepy stuff, the stuff that you and I have seen countless times when it comes to shows featuring that topic or movies as well. So in this case, I'm going to showcase some other cases that this chapter is highlighting, and then I'll give my own thoughts and opinions on it. Lots of good feedback too. Lots of people love this book. It definitely has a good amount of information to share here, rich information as well when it comes to various topics. We still got a long ways to go, so there's going to be plenty of more parts to share here. So this one, again, continues with part 2, chapter 4, Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind. This next segment is called Abduction at Sergi Pontoise. And then I'll go ahead and I'll share my own thoughts and opinions on this part here afterward. So here's what it says. Although extremely rare, UFO abductions lasting several days are not unheard of. In America, the most famous case of this kind is that of Travis Walton, who in November 1975 disappeared for 5 days after encountering a disc-shaped object in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest in Arizona. A lesser-known but equally striking event happened in France in 1979 at Sergi Pontoise, an overspill town situated 25 miles northwest of Paris. The victim was 18-year-old Frank Fontaine, who was allegedly abducted in full view of his two friends, Salomon Ndouai, who was 25, and Jean-Pierre Prevost, who was 26. The three men were market traders, rather shady characters who drove an unlicensed and uninsured car without driver's licenses. Prevost was on file at the intelligence branch of the Gendarmerie as an anarchist. He and Ndouai lived next door to each other in a cheap, drab apartment block called La Justice Mauve, Purple Justice. Fontaine lived 2 miles away. In the early hours of Monday, November 26, 1979, they began to load their battered old car with a stock of jeans and sweaters, which they planned to take to the market at Gazores, 35 miles away. An early start was required since the car had a habit of breaking down, and they wanted to get to a good spot in the market. Frank Fontaine helped to push start the car, and they remained at the wheel to make sure it didn't stall while his friends began to bring the merchandise down. At this point, Fontaine noticed something unusual in the night sky, a bright elongated light. Thinking that a photograph of the light might be worth some money to the newspapers, Ndouai hurried up to his apartment to fetch his camera. Prevost also went inside to collect another load of jeans. Left on his own, Fontaine drove the car onto the main road adjacent to the apartment block, trying to get a better look at the object. Alerted to the sound of Fontaine driving away, Ndouai and Prevost looked out of their windows to see the car coming to a halt, its engine no longer running. Prevost was angry because they would probably have to jump-start the car all over again. Followed by Ndouai, he rushed downstairs and out of the building to be confronted by an incredible sight. The rear of the car was completely enshrouded by a sphere of glowing fog around which several smaller spheres were moving. The small spheres entered the large one, which seemed to transform itself into the same elongated light they had all seen earlier. It then ascended into the sky and vanished. Fontaine, as his friends quickly discovered, was nowhere to be seen. Ndouai and Prevost immediately went to the police, who, after listening to their story, told them to inform the Gendarmerie, which, as a department of the Ministry of National Defense, handles all French UFO reports. The two witnesses were questioned for several days. Various theories were put forward by the authorities, including that Fontaine had engineered his own disappearance to avoid his military service. They also briefly suspected that Ndouai and Prevost might have killed him and come up with a UFO story to cover their tracks. The questioning continued for a week. both by the authorities and the media, which by now had got their teeth firmly into the story. But the whereabouts of Fontaine were still a complete mystery. At about 4 a.m. on Monday, December 3rd, 1 week after his disappearance, Frank Fontaine awoke to find himself in a cabbage field near the Purple Justice building. Confused, he went up to Solomon Unduai's apartment and rang the bell. When Unduai saw his friend, he hugged him joyously. Fontaine was nonplussed by this behavior, not realizing that a full week had passed. He was still expecting to begin the journey to Gizors. Although besieged by reporters and UFO investigators, Fontaine could offer no information about his experience other than that he had been overcome with drowsiness while looking for the object, and then he had awoken in that cabbage field. One of the groups that had become involved with the case was the Institut Mondial des Sciences Avances, the World Institute of Advanced Sciences, co-founded by Jimmy Guai, a well-known science fiction writer. Guai declared his absolute belief in the veracity of the three witnesses. As a result, Fontaine, Unduai, and Prevost agreed to cooperate with him on a book, Sergi Pontois' UFO Contacts, which became a huge bestseller. The book described how the investigation had taken a sudden left turn when Prevost volunteered to be hypnotized. Fontaine himself had steadfastly refused. What emerged from these sessions was that Prevost, not Fontaine, had been the focus of the abduction. Fontaine had simply been used by the aliens to focus the world's attention on the events in Sergi Pontois. The information Prevost provided turned out to be rather disappointing, similar, in fact, to the tired and trite pronouncements of the contactees of the 1950s and early 1960s. The aliens, calling themselves the intelligences from beyond, were here to warn the Earth of the dangers of technology, etc. According to Prevost's account, expanded upon in his own subsequent book, The Truth about the Sergi Pontois affair, he was invited to a secret alien base located in a railway tunnel containing an abandoned railway carriage from the Second World War. The tunnel was near the small village of Bourg de Sirod, 225 miles away from the French-Swiss border, a place in which Prevost had spent much time as a child. He was taken there by someone claiming to be a traveling salesman who had called at his apartment soon after Fontaine's return. Inside the tunnel, Prevost found many other people, some of whom were sitting around a fire. The people had been brought from all over the world to be given the philosophy of the intelligences from beyond by a friendly and talkative alien called Hyrio. The Sergi Pontois case was also investigated without the cooperation of the three witnesses by the French Control Group, a highly respected, scientifically oriented organization whose representatives discovered several inconsistencies in the story. Although Prevost professed no previous interest whatsoever in UFOs, control investigators established that at the time of the incident, he had been reading a magazine in which an abduction story very similar to Fontaine's was being serialized. It also became clear that two additional people had been present on the morning of the abduction: Prevost's girlfriend Corinne and a young man called Fabrice Joly. Why had this been covered up by the witnesses? According to Control, a possible answer was that Unduai and Prevost had made much of their driving straight to the police after the Fontaine's abductions, in spite of the fact that the car was uninsured and they had no driving licenses. The intended implication was that they did not care if they got into trouble. It was more important to them that the police be informed of their friend's disappearance. The fact was that Joly had a valid license and had agreed to drive them to the market at Gizors. Other contradictions became evident. The journalist Iris Bellon Duplan, who was covering the case, was conducting an interview with Prevost on the night Fontaine returned. Prevost had told her that he had no money or food since the abduction business had been interfering with his ability to make his living. So Bellon Duplan invited him to her nearby apartment for a meal. This is consistent with Fontaine's assertion that Prevost was not at home when he tried his apartment and that he then tried Unduai's. However, Unduai claimed that he had been woken up at about 4:30 a.m. and looked out of his window. On the road below, he saw a ball of light from which Fontaine emerged. These and other discrepancies strongly imply that Fontaine, Prevost, and Unduai concocted a hoax probably for financial gain, that quickly got out of control owing to the intense worldwide media interest. While Prevost subsequently admitted as much, Fontaine has always maintained that he was abducted, which raises the possibility that the three men began to embellish what had been a genuine UFO event. Alternatively, Fontaine may have fallen or been placed into some altered state of consciousness in which he hallucinated the abduction. For his part, he maintains that his only memory was of being in a strange room that appeared to be a laboratory of some kind. In his book Revelations, Jacques Vallée presents some very intriguing information with regard to this last theory. Apparently, a French researcher was able to secure an interview with a representative of the French Ministry of Defense who claimed that Frank Fontaine had been abducted in the course of an experiment designed to test the reactions and the investigative abilities of local law enforcement agencies, in addition to the reactions of the scientific establishment. According to the man from the Ministry of Defense, Fontaine had then been placed in a drug-induced state of extreme suggestibility. Vallée speculates that the inspiration for the scenario lay in the Travis Walton abduction in 1975. If this is true, then the fathomless waters of the UFO mystery become even muddier, with an unknown number of close encounters perhaps having been staged by secret government groups in an effort to gauge the reactions of the population to genuinely anomalous activity. Next segment is called Abduction and Bilocation. Most UFO investigators tend to dismiss the claims of the contactees who come to prominence in the 1950s and 60s. In those days, the idea that UFOs might have pilots wishing to interact directly with humans was totally new and not a little outrageous to contemporary researchers. The information they conveyed was so deeply suspect, consisting mainly of warnings to curtail our irresponsible development of nuclear weapons, which was having an adverse effect on the balance of the universe and jeopardizing the safety of a number of alien races. The aliens themselves, entirely human-looking in every respect, usually claim to have come from various planets within our own solar system. This claim was shown to be absolutely ludicrous in the light of subsequent unmanned exploration of those planets, all of which are totally unsuitable for the development of humanoid life. In fact, as we learn more and more of the deeply unpleasant conditions of our nearest planetary neighbors, the UFOnauts gradually claimed more distant origins, mysterious worlds with names like Bavi and Zamdik, orbiting unreachable stars. These beings were dismissed as figments of the imagination by investigators. Their messages of universal peace, love, and brotherhood were extremely distasteful to those anxious to discover a hard, scientific explanation for what was a doubtless genuine mystery. And yet the field of ufology is an immensely complex one, whose individual elements resonate powerfully, subtly echoing down through the decades, altering their surface details while leaving their essence intact. Additional details are frequently added to the core scenario, integrating them into a modified whole. Take, for example, the case of Judy Dorothy. Judy's frightening encounter took place while she was driving in her car near Houston, Texas in May 1973. 4 members of her family were also present. All 5 people saw a bright light in the sky. The light seemed to be following them, so Judy pulled over to the side of the road, got out, and walked to the back of the car to get a better view of it. She was unable to recall what happened next. However, when she underwent hypnotic regression with psychologist Dr. Leo Sprinkle in March 1980, disturbing memories surfaced. Apparently, Judy had what is known as a biolocation experience, which, as the name suggests, means that the recipient seems to be in 2 different locations at the same time. Judy reported standing beside her car and simultaneously standing inside the UFO that had been pacing them. The occupants of the craft were in the process of mutilating a calf that they had captured, drawing it up through a beam of yellow light. The light seemed to be filled with strange, swirling particles, and Judy had the impression that it would feel solid if touched. The beings themselves were very similar in appearance to the Greys, in that they were short and spindly, with pale, sickly looking skin, large heads, and vestigial noses and mouths. Their eyes, however, were different from the jet black, featureless orbs commonly associated within the species. They had yellow irises and vertical cat like pupils. Judy's horror was increased immeasurably when she saw that her daughter was also aboard the craft and was being examined by the beings. However, they assured her, communicating through telepathy, that neither of them would be harmed, adding that they had not intended to bring her into the craft. Her bilocation had somehow been spontaneous. As the UFOnauts went to work on the live calf, which was surely pointlessly cruel, excising various parts of its body through tubes that deposited them in different receptacles, they explained to Judy that they were in the process of monitoring the spread of some form of toxin, whose presence in the environment would soon have an adverse effect on humans. During her hypnosis sessions, she told Leo Sprinkle, "It's like if we continue like we are now, it's going to involve not only us, but possibly others. And they're trying to stop something that could cause a chain reaction and maybe involving them. I don't know. We're not the only ones to be concerned." When they had finished their procedures, the beings returned the dead calf to Earth via the beam. In his examination of the case, Richard L. Thompson makes a cogent point, one which is echoed by the skeptics who maintain that UFO abductions do not occur. The episode Judy described in her hypnosis is illogical given the apparent level of the being's technology. Beings capable of producing anti-gravity beams will presumably be able to detect pollutants in animals without harming them. Thompson believes that if animal mutilations really are the work of non-human creatures, then they may be leaving their carcasses in farmers' fields, itself an apparently unnecessary act, in order to frighten humanity or to demonstrate their displeasures with the way we are managing the earth. The reader will doubtless detect an echo of their concerns for the future of our planet expressed more politely by the Space Brothers. Although the surface details have been radically altered, the appearance of their beings, their savage treatment of another living creature, their ongoing program of taking people very much against their will, the core reason for their presence remains unchanged. They are here because humans are behaving irresponsibly, calling their very future into question. In the 1950s and 1960s, the aliens were concerned with atomic weapons testing, which would upset the balance of the universe. In recent years, they seem to have shifted their attention to chemical rather than nuclear dangers. And yet they still do not seem to have our best interests exclusively at heart. The implication remains that they themselves will somehow be adversely affected if we continue to treat our planetary environment in a cavalier fashion. They are looking after their own future as well. There are a number of possible ways in which this may be interpreted. It is possible that when human percipients report that aliens are concerned about the environment, they are merely concretizing their own subconscious fears. On the other hand, it may be that if these beings really do exist, they, or at least some of them, may be indigenous to the earth, having always lived here alongside us, perhaps in an adjacent plane of existence. This theory will be examined in greater detail towards the end of this book. If they are truly extraterrestrial, having their own port on some distant planet, they may be caretakers of Earth, a position we had always assumed was already filled by ourselves, given the duty of ensuring the survival of the biosphere. When they imply that ecological disasters will cause a chain reaction of adverse effect for others, perhaps they are referring to certain consequences arising from the dereliction of a bestowed duty. Whatever the ultimate nature of Judy Doherty's experience, there remains a striking parallel with that of Maureen Putty, discussed a little earlier. Like Mrs. Putty, Judy, in a sense, left her body, entering the UFO in an apparently non-physical state. In Mrs. Putty's case, her apparently unconscious body was in full view of two investigators throughout the experience. In Judy's case, her family watched in bewilderment as she stood beside their car, apparently watching the UFO, while from her perspective, she was simultaneously inside it. Judy Doherty's encounter, like Mrs. Putty's, is representative of the complex nature of UFO abductions, which carries implications far beyond the straightforward nuts and bolts interpretation favored by many researchers. It is possible, even likely, that we are dealing with something rather more subtle than the arrival of explorers from another planet. And then that's it. That's it for part 2 of chapter 4 of Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind, the chapter that we're featuring here from the book UFO Sightings by Alan Baker. Let's go ahead and let's talk about that here. A little bit shorter when it comes to this part, but still it highlights 2 longer segments within it. First one was the one that was the abduction at Sergei Pontoise. So here we had a situation that mimicked, as the book was rightfully stating, the disappearance and then reappearance of Travis Walton, the one that occurred back in November 1975. But in this case, you had some other parties, 3 men in total, and then there was some weird twists that happened throughout the encounter. First, there was that guy who was last named Fontaine, who apparently disappeared, like something, a ball of light or some other forms of light had taken him somewhere. Then it turns out that one of the other parties, Provost, was actually the real one, the one who ended up being abducted, and that the aliens were doing some weird switcheroo. I'm not 100% sure. But then you had another twist involving Fontaine still being abducted, but appearing later on, not in some field, but instead in some road that was witnessed once again conveniently by one of those friends. And then you had some other situations that, again, it just was a lot of red flags. As I was reading it, it was like red flags to me. Seemed like it was big red flags to the author, and no doubt it was also to the investigators, like anyone that was researching that information. And plus, the biggest one for me was how there was other people that were reportedly there with them, but those people's experiences were conveniently not brought up the first time whenever the 3 men were giving their story. And then, of course, you had what I consider the biggest red flag of all. All of this was placed into a book, which became a huge bestseller, and obviously that tends to tie things afterward as to why this was happening. So, yes, I think there's a lot to take with a grain of salt when it comes to this encounter. Just too many twists and turns with too many convenient circumstances, all of it leading to a best-selling book, 2 of them actually, when it came to a different perspective from one of the other quote-unquote abductees. And then with one of them eventually stating that, yeah, it was made up and so on. So definitely something that I'm not going to probably talk about in a future video, maybe just as a warning. I don't know. I'll have to see what my mindset is like later on. But the next segment was called Abduction and Bilocation. This one featured the abduction of a woman by the name of Judy Doherty to be specific. There she was with her family, expecting something that was apparently following them. She got out of the car to do so, and then she was gone. And then when she came back, that's when she started to provide, once again, the hypnosis testimony, which also seemed a little weird. Like, the author is right, because it seems like the themes change over the years. It does seem like the first set of abductions are about nuclear dangers, and then the next set of abductions are about stuff impacting the environment, and then who knows what the next type of themes will be afterwards. So it ties into what I was saying in one of my other videos. I don't know how far back, but I was saying that it's weird how the technology that people see UFOs changes with the times too. Like at first there was UFOs that looked like old rockets, like rockets you would see in a cheap science fiction film that was made from a black and white days and so on. And then it changed to what the 60s perceived as the future, like when it came to what other rockets would look like years ahead. They all followed that theme. And then it changed once again to being nice, slick UFOs, stuff that mimicked almost like the stealth bomber and so on. So it made me wonder, like the same theme, but here involving what these aliens are doing in their communications with people and the warnings, how that also is influenced. I don't know. I might talk about this case later on, but I'll have to see what the rest of the cases are and then pick and choose which ones I feel are the best ones to share. But otherwise, let me know what your comments are below. All right, everybody. Thank you so very much. Look out for the next part coming up soon. Have a good day, everyone. Take care.